I was moved from county jail in October of 2016, following my conviction of armed robbery. I'm not here to garner sympathy, but I want to be clear on a couple of things. This was an unfair sentence. Not in the usual innocent man put in jail type of schlock, but in the way that they were clearly pushing me towards being put in a particular jail. I had my blood tested, and my hair was sent to a lab. They took pictures of my fingernails. Never seen anything like it, but I was basically catatonic. I was in a bad place. Wanted it all to just be over. At the time, I didn't think much about the process. I didn't think about the records that were passed between the guards and doctors, and I didn't care much about the blue rubber stamps that were put at the base of every signed legal document. I didn't know what was normal and what wasn't. I just wanted to get into the haze and no brain the next 6 or so years away. I was put in a cell with Lian Soon, a Chinese American man. To this day, I don't have the slightest idea what he was in for. Guy looked like your average college kid, but there was just something off about him. He just had this look of complete dissociation, like he was miles away. He never really looked at you. It was like he looked straight through you. Then again, a lot of inmates get that. I barely managed to talk to him in the first few days. We agreed that I took the top bunk. That was pretty much all we managed to talk about. We had a straightforward schedule. Breakfast and work up till 11, lunch, more work, some yard time, dinner. After that, we either got to our specialised program timing, religious services, NA, anger management, etc., or an extra hour in the yard. Then back in the cell, lights out by 11. In my first few days, I had to go through a lot of orientation. There were kind of who's who introduction you might expect, but also just someone pointing to you to which shelf they stock the detergent. Basic stuff. I got a job cleaning the beddings. They were so cheap that a firm enough poke would go straight through them, like a piece of paper. Washing them was basically putting them in a shredder. We had to go on such a low setting that they rarely ever got clean. I swear I saw a cockroach in one of the pillowcases once, and the damn thing was still alive after the wash and dry. The pillows were also crap. They ripped easily, and feathers would get stuck to everything. Probably wasn't a room in this whole facility without feathers littering the floor. Hell, they were even in the yard. Most of them were, in fact. We'd have rotating schedules, so I rarely got to work with the same people 2 days in a row. I started to recognize a few faces, but people mostly kept to themselves. There was no locker room talk, no braggarts, no bravado, just people hunkering down and shutting up. But even early on, I noticed something was off. I think it all came down to the yard. People stayed away from the prison yard. No one used the exercise equipment. People just stuck to the walls or silently walked by the fences. There were no loud conversations, no sports, nothing. And as soon as that 3 hour was up, people were pushing to get back in. From day one, I got the impression that the yard was a bad place to be, but no one was telling me why. What kind of prison has dust on the free weights? By the end of the first week, I started to get into the routine. I was out cold by 10 most nights. Hell, I had the bedding with the least holes in them. Might as well use that luxury. But there was that one night when I just couldn't sleep. I'd lay down, and then all of a sudden, I'd be wide awake. There was this whistling wind that came down the hall, and it just kept echoing in the back of my head. At first it was a wind, then a whistle, and with no other sound around, it kept growing in my head until it sounded like a goddamn fire truck siren. I'd push my hands against my ears, cover my head in a pillow, but it didn't do a thing. Finally, I just started to mutter to myself, just to fill the air with some other noise. "Please stop," I'd whisper. "Please stop." And the funny thing, it did. It stopped. The next day, I was exhausted. I kept nodding off. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, pretty much any time I could sit down. The guards would push me awake, and the other inmates just sort of stared at me. Some of them actively avoided me, like there was something wrong with me. When it was time for the yard, the guards took me aside and asked me to help clean the common area. No yard time for me. Gotta sweep some feathers. That night, I went to bed as soon as I could. But the moment my head hit that pillow, I was wide awake again. And down through the hall, there was that howling wind. There was no way for me to sleep. The sound just kept growing, and all my tiredness was just gone. Whispering didn't work anymore. I had to speak out loud. Around midnight, I was still awake. I was just lying there, talking to myself, putting words to the random thoughts in the back of my head to keep my mind occupied. Anything to drown out that awful droning noise outside. I couldn't let it grow any further. It was like trying to stop a ship from sinking, one bucket of water at a time. I don't have the slightest idea how Leon tolerated it, but he didn't say a word. Things just got worse. I couldn't sleep that entire night, so when it was time to get up, I could barely stand. I fell asleep brushing my teeth, dropping my toothbrush in the sink. I was so used to talking to myself by then that I'd blurt out whatever came to mind. I was sleep deprived, exhausted, and just confused. And people took notice. There was this one guy, Marlin, who was about as new as I was. Short, athletic guy who was just itching for a fight. I accidentally bumped into him in the lunch queue, and he went off on me. Pushed me out of the line, bashed me over the face with a tray, and just started wailing on me. The guards were taking their sweet time, so I just had to take it. But I couldn't. There was just something in me that wanted to hurt this guy. I grabbed his shirt and looked him in the eyes. "You want to get whipped, Greenie?" I said. "You want us to whip you?" I don't know where the words came from. It was just the first thing that came to mind, and the sleep deprivation just forced it out of my mouth like a hiccup. "Well, what did he say?" he stammered. I asked if the little Greenie wanted a whipping. He backed off. His jaw went slack as he just stared at me unblinking. Just as I'd found words out of nowhere, he'd lost them. His eyes teared up as he backed himself up against a wall. The prison guards came up to restrain us, and I could see all the fights had run out of him. "See you at the orchard, Greenie," I added. "Whip, whip." Marlin broke down. He screamed, tears running out of his eyes. He dropped to the floor, and the guards had to carry him out. I thought I'd feel good after that, but the way everyone was staring at me made me feel like a museum exhibit. I had this sickeningly wide smile painted on my face, but it wasn't mine. None of this was me. I was losing control, and it scared the hell out of me. I was a puppet. That night, I didn't even bother trying to sleep. I knew that as soon as I'd lay down to try, I'd just be wide awake again. Instead, I tried sleeping on my feet or sitting on the floor. This time, Lion couldn't ignore me. He sat up on his bed, looking at me instead of through me. "You on something?" he asked. "You itching?" "Nah," I said, shaking my head. "Just broken. Something's not right." "You phobic? Trouble with the walls?" "Maybe. I don't know. Can't sleep." "Looks like you sleep all the time, just not in here." "Yeah," I sighed. "Yeah, that's about right." "The stamp when you get here? You got any stamps?" "Some, yeah. Blue ones." "Everyone get blue ones. What shape?" "Dunno," I shrugged. Leon took a look at me. In those few dragging seconds, I could hear the wind outside growing louder, and I winced. I groaned to drown out the noise, but it was barely working. I might have to scream to keep it together for another night. "They got 2 stamps," he said. "A hand and a sunflower. You sure you don't know which one you got?" "Which did you get?" I asked. "What do they mean?" "I got the hand," he said. "Most of us did. No idea what it means, but the sunflowers are always a bit..." He pointed at me to make a point. "Maladaptive." "Private prisons," I chuckled. "Bullshit, all of it." Lion leaned back in his bed and closed his eyes. "Yeah," he sighed. "Sorting us into flowers and hands like a goddamn daycare. Probably got a woodchuck and dolphin stamp too." Liam was out like a light, but as expected, I couldn't sleep. I paced back and forth, screaming into a pillow, and tried massaging my ears. The scratching noise sort of helped, but I still found myself restless. Finally, I got out of bed and pressed my head against the door. Maybe if I let the wind howl, it'll take pity on me. Maybe it would get to a point where it would either kill me or stop. I didn't care which, as long as something happened. But the strangest thing came to me. As I pressed my head against the door, the sound became clearer. The wind softened to a whistle and then a gentle hum. The more I tried to lean into it, to listen, the more beautiful it became. Right there, leaning against the door, I had the best sleep of my entire life. The next morning, Leanne pulled me up as the guards did their rounds. I'd slept all through the night and I felt amazing. But even then and there, at my best, I could hear a little piercing sound. That wind, that whisper, was still in the back of my mind, even now during daytime. But all I had to do was lean into it, to listen, and a wave of calm would wash over me. It worried me how easy it was. You got through it? Leanne asked. I'm getting there. I wasn't paying much attention during breakfast. I was zoned out, listening to what had turned into a melody. Something was speaking to me, but not through words, through emotions and sensation. So it wasn't a word that warned me about Marlin creeping up on me with a sharpened toothbrush. It wasn't the guards or the other inmates. No, it was something in the back of my mind, screaming at me to hurt him. So I did. All I heard was laughter. There was this alien joy springing up in my chest, forcing me to my feet. I remember turning around and the world looking different. I felt 4 feet taller. I was looking into Marlin's eyes, but I didn't see him. I saw a teenage kid running through an orchard, hunted by his older brothers who wanted to beat him with a tire iron. Whip, whip. When I came to, I was still laughing. It wasn't my own laugh, and neither was the joy. The howling wind was finally quiet, but it felt like a stranger in my own body. I couldn't feel my limbs, and it took me seconds just to orient myself, to remember my fingers, my feet, my eyes. Marlin was bleeding on the floor from a dozen wounds. Deep bruising, broken bones, possibly brain damage from repeated hits to the side of the head. Involuntary twitching, like a fish out of water, his mouth open and closing. Like me, he just couldn't find the words. It looked like I'd beaten him with a goddamn tire iron. I was taken back to my cell without a word, paraded through the halls like a prize. I could feel the other inmates staring at me, trying to figure me out. As soon as I looked their way, I saw them recoil. I don't know what the hell they'd seen, but they were looking at me like a goddamn monster. I was locked in my cell for hours. No one was allowed in. And all the while, I kept hearing something in the back of my head, singing to me, asking me to listen just a little closer. And as soon as I resisted, that noise turned to pain. Within minutes, I was pacing the cell, spewing whatever nonsense came flooding through my mind. Nonsense about everything and everyone. Just noise. When the guards finally opened the door, I turned to them without skipping a beat. They had their tasers ready. Deb doesn't know if Eddie is really your son, I rambled. You think he was premature, because she had that time with Irvin at her job the month before. She thinks about telling you. She thinks that might be the push you need to finally divorce. A taser to the neck, and I didn't even feel it. As I dropped to the floor in a spasm, my body was screaming with laughter. He had her on the copier. She didn't even think about you. She hoped to see him there again next week. And there, someone deep inside, I found my own thoughts and words, standing by as someone else held the reins. I wanted to tear my ears out to make it all go away, but I couldn't even move my hands. I listened too long and too closely, and now the guards were dragging me by the neck. They took me out to the yard. I heard them talking. They were standing next to me, carrying me, but it still sounded like they were in another room. I could barely make out their voices. Hatchet Man mixed up the bloodworks, they said. Got the wrong class. Shit, we got a bloomer? We had a bloomer this whole time? It's a goddamn Christmas miracle he didn't pop his celly. So why are we taking him out? Just making sure. Protocol. Fuck protocol. Fuck off. They left me in the middle of the yard, lining up in a circle around me. The guard I'd been yelling at stayed inside, weeping over a picture. After a few minutes, I felt a tingle in my hands. It felt like being poured back into my body, like my mind was a liquid. It all came back to me, one thing at a time. Language, memories, senses, choice. Suddenly, I was standing up. The wind was clearer out in the open. It was colder than expected, and I wasn't even wearing my shoes. There was a stillness in the air, but there was something menacing to it, like the eye of a storm. Nothing's happening, I heard. We take him in? Hold on. Look up. From afar, it looked like snow. I didn't even question it. Snow in mid-July? Sure, why not? But it wasn't snowing. A white feather touched my nose. I looked up into the clouds, and there, far above, I saw something look back. I can't explain what I felt at that moment. I felt like I was looking into the eye in the sky, an impossible physical being, but there was nothing there. And yet, it spoke through me, like playing a mind game of charades with myself. Pictures flashing in the back of my mind, trying to reach an understanding. Hundreds of memories pounding at the front of my brain every second, like a pitcher being filled up and spilling over the edge. I got a nosebleed trying to keep up. My eyes rolled back, but I still felt like I was looking up. It was easier to see with my eyes closed. My mouth seized up from trying to find 1,000 words at once, instead settling on noises and grunts. There were parts that were crystal clear. It showed me memories I didn't know I had. It showed me my eyes opening for the first time, little hands grabbing my mother's cardigan. Her big 80s glasses made her eyes look like a cartoon. It showed me waking up in my crib, reaching for the little toys dancing overhead. And I understood what it meant. That we were born with this instinctual drive to reach beyond our means, to reach towards the sky, to grab and pull down the unknown to us, making it a part of ourselves. To the most basic instinct of my being was meant to be here, to do this, to reach up. No, I wheezed. All was silent. I looked down as I floated 6 feet off the ground. No, I groaned. Memories of long-lost dreams came rushing back. Pleasant thoughts you don't want to wake from. Promise of love, lust, joy, and comfort. It was all there, just waiting for me to take it. All I had to do was reach for it, to reach into the sky and take it. But there was something more. That eye in the sky looking down at me. Not malevolent, not angry, not evil, just vast beyond comprehension. I was nothing more than a strand of wheat being plucked into the air by a curious farmer. No, 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 I screamed. It came running up to me. Guards grabbed my legs, pulling me down. It felt like I was being torn in half. Part of me desperately reaching upwards, and my conscious self holding me to the ground. All the while, the pleasant silence was turning from a whisper to a scream. "We got it!" the guard yelled as the weather picked up. "Get him out of here! Get him!" Something let go of me. The guard on my left lost his breath as he suddenly went limp. With nothing but a whistle, I saw him whisked into the sky. Not a word of protest, not a sound. Just a human life growing smaller and disappearing overhead. I dropped to the ground as they scrambled to get inside. Another guard fell flat on his stomach as something invisible grabbed his ankles. Again, a soft whistle, and he was gone. A spot in the dark. "Run! Come on!" The other guards were standing by the entrance, holding the doors open. They were waving at me, desperate for me to just run. But every part of me wanted to stay, to reach up, to touch the sky and go back to that place I was meant to be, to feel my mother's cardigan between my baby-soft fingertips, and to look into the night sky with wonder of what could be. It was all there. And yet, my body knew to run. The moment I got inside, I heard thumping. Chunks of meat sprayed across the yard. Fragments of bone getting stuck in the barbed wire. Fabric torn into shreds. Whatever was up there was happy now, and the howling wind was silent. We all just stood there. I could barely breathe. I'd been so close to surrendering, to give in to it. Whatever was up there had no intention of caring for me. There was no love, no joy, no comfort. All it could promise me was a swift death at best, or the life of a sleepless puppet. But for a moment, we all just stood there. We weren't inmates or prison guards. At that moment, we were just people trying to understand ourselves. I got processed the next day. They double-checked my blood. Turns out they contaminated my result. Sloppy work from the esteemed people at Hatchet Biotechnica. This time, I saw them clearly stamp my papers. Blue ink, in the shape of a little sunflower. I was taken out of state. They said it was a matter of security on account of getting in fights with Marlin. Apparently, he'd broken both legs and his shoulder. Still, I knew better. This wasn't a matter of security. This was about fixing a grave mistake. This prison had a purpose, but I wasn't part of it. Instead, I did my time in a place with no wind, and now I'm out on parole. To this day, I get a shiver up my spine when I hear the whistling wind. I'm scared of my dreams, of my memories. I'm afraid there's still something in me that wants me to go back, to look up. My psychiatrist, Dr. Bogan, tells me I've got an agoraphobic trauma to deal with. She says she has some kind of experimental treatment for it, but I don't know. Overexposure therapy sounds dangerous. But even now, I find myself suddenly waking up in the middle of the night. My body is talking to itself, telling truths I couldn't possibly know to an empty room. Sometimes not even in my own language. Sometimes in no language at all. Every now and then, a white feather still lands on my shoulder, and I just know that looking up will be the end of me. Or the start. I'm sorry, I repeated. We're all out of the blue ones. All out? The old woman asked. How can you be all out? We have some beautiful purple azaleas that... They're not blue, she protested, stomping her foot. They have to be blue. Mrs. Morris, we have several types of... But they're not goddamn blue. Using her whole arm, she bowled over an entire display case of herbs. Ramson, dill, basil, all spilled out on the floor in one angry swoop. I just stared at the mess in disbelief, mouth agape. You're getting me blue, you grinning bitch. You're getting me blue. Mrs. Morris stormed out, almost knocking over a stack of pots on the way out. My hands were shaking. Things had gotten out of hand. It wasn't always like this. My mother used to be a flower girl. She had a small stall by the railroad that she'd tended since she was 13 years old. When she was 17, she fell in love with the son of a local rancher. That man ended up being my father, a few years and a shotgun wedding later. My father wanted to give her everything in the world. She went from a stall to a flower shop just off the main street. That shop was her sanctuary, her home away from home. 12 hours a day, no matter if open or not, that's where she'd be. The Green Gardens, or the Big Green, was her baby just as much as I was. I never intended to work there myself. Sure, I helped out, but my ambition was to be a marine biologist. But my mom got sick, and she needed more help around the Big Green. Over the course of a few months, she went from 12 hours a day to about 2 hours a week. The rest of the time, the Big Green was just me and Dad, and he had other work to do. I remember celebrating my 20th birthday behind the counter at the Big Green. Someone had to tend the shop. I was 22 when my mom passed on. She never stood a chance. She just withered away, much like a flower. They never really figured out what the problem was. She had a ton of symptoms, but no apparent cause. The closest they could find was a calcium deficiency. It was as if her body was just angry with her. Dad and I thought about selling the Big Green, but we just couldn't bring ourselves to do it. No one else wanted to keep running the shop. All they wanted was the property. Dad didn't have the heart to see the place turned into a coffee shop or a bar. The Big Green had to stay green. I remember one discussion I had with him the night we decided to keep the place open. He'd invited me over for dinner, and we just finished a large serving of pasta bolognese. For a few minutes we just sat there at the table, staring at our empty plates. The silence was undercut by the kitchen clock, ticking away. No one thought it'd grow, he said suddenly. The ground is rough. Too much calcium. Mom made it work, I nodded. In a way, yeah, he agreed. But you know, to the soil, no one is perfect. Dad wasn't dealing with the loss very well. He eventually quit his job, and our joint venture to keep the Big Green turned into a solo effort. He moved out of town, leaving the family home and the Big Green in my care. I couldn't blame him, and yet I did. I celebrated a lot of birthdays behind that counter, and as I started to close in on 30, I'd left my marine biology dreams far behind. But Dad was right about a few things. The soil really wasn't made for growing flowers. While a lot of the flowers we got came from outside suppliers, we had a few special local flowers that we grew in our greenhouses. Mostly forget-me-nots, garden roses, lilacs, and sunflowers. We also had a few tracheliums and flower arrangements. Over the years, it was getting harder and harder to get anything to grow. The garden roses just started falling apart, and the lilacs were losing their vibrance. Even the flowers inside the shop were getting drier and drier no matter how much you watered them. I remember one early June morning when I got to the shop and everything in the window had died overnight. I'd replaced every grain of soil my mother had used, but death came either way. I closed the shop early that day. I was considering not opening it again. But this is where things started to change. The next day, I noticed two older women looking at the front window of the shop. I'd cleaned up most of the dead plants from the previous day, but there were a few left. But right there, in the corner of the window, I'd forgotten to remove a few of the dead sunflowers. Except they weren't dead. They were very much alive. They were, however, a vibrant blue with black stems. Blue? Weird. Trying something new? Asked Mrs. Solis. Lovely colour. Yeah, I nodded and slid the key in the door. Yeah, it is. They looked at me, expecting some kind of explanation. I had none. Instead, I just looked at the strange flower that had popped up in my window like an intruder. And strangely enough, it felt like I was the intruder, not the flower. While most of my inventory had dried up, a few select flowers had regrown. A few sunflowers, some lilacs, delilahs, and freesias. They were a bit smaller, but very much alive. Although they had this vibrant blue colour. I'd never seen anything like it. Mrs. Solis and a friend oohs and ahs over what they thought was something completely new. They're all blue, they laughed. My, isn't that special? Did you colour them? Asked Mr. Solis. Or did you grow them like this? I certainly didn't colour them. But then again, I didn't grow them either. All throughout the day, people who usually just walked by stopped to look in the window. Every single flower that had grown back in that vibrant blue colour got sold. It was a blowout sale, completely out of nowhere. Some bought so many that they could barely carry them. They all just stopped by the window, staring slack-jawed at the strange flowers. I swear, some of the flowers seemed to pop out of nowhere. Customers smelled the flowers, stroked the petals, and admired the many variations of the vibrant blue. Two grown men from a nearby construction site almost got into a brawl over a bouquet of garden roses. As I closed up the shop that day, only a handful of flowers remained, none of them blue. A few survivors who'd lived through the drought. I made a call to my supplier, but they weren't able to send any extra shipments on short notice. Instead, I had to bring in whatever I had from the greenhouses. But I was shocked to see the greenhouses full to the brim with blue flowers. Slightly smaller, but blue nonetheless. Grown out of dead soil, these bright flowers thrived. Seemingly overnight, the green gardens had turned blue. I didn't know what to think, but people seemed to love them. I was still on the fence. Something didn't feel right. Whenever I was alone with them, I felt somehow threatened. Like they were turning towards me, watching me, evaluating my efforts. As I got in my car that night, I called my dad. It was the first time I'd talked to him for months. We'd grown apart, and we usually didn't talk unless something important came up. Either that, or a quick call for the holidays. But this was different. I had to try 3 times before he finally picked up. Are you okay? He asked. Before hello, before anything else, he was worried. It was nice to know. Hey Dad, I wanted to talk about the shop. Did something happen? Did Mom ever talk about blue flowers? Dad went quiet. I just heard his elevated breathing. Dad, did she ever talk about blue flowers? I repeated. Yeah, he responded. Yeah, she mentioned them a few times. What did she say? Well, he paused for a few seconds. I could hear him scratching his beard. She thought they were some sort of weeds. She said she was going to get rid of them. Did she? Yeah, I suppose. She did. There was a pause. He was clearly thinking of something. She thought it was some sort of chemical in the soil. Didn't like it one bit, he continued. Are they back? Yeah, I sighed. Shop's full of them. Just be careful, he warned. I don't want you to get sick too. The next morning, I decided to get rid of them all. I agreed with my mom. It seemed strange. Unnatural in a way. The colour was way too vibrant, and they were just sort of off. So when I entered that greenhouse, I had every intention of just pulling everything up by the roots and tossing it into a bucket. I grabbed one of the discoloured sunflowers and started to pull. The petals started to rattle, and I could feel the stem shake. I let go of it. I'd never noticed a flower doing that. Was it some sort of reaction to the heat of my hand? I tried again. A steady grip, a slow pull. Again, it rattled. I took a step back, letting it go once again. Maybe it was like in one of those videos I'd seen of an octopus arm moving when exposed to soy sauce. For a final time, I took a firm grip and just pulled it up. The rattle stopped. Suddenly, there was this awful smell. This disgusting, gut-wrenching smell. Like an old fish left out in the sun, covered in a chemical trying to disguise itself as a citrus fruit. It was this awful, manufactured smell. I dropped the sunflower and stepped back, dry heaving. I had this strange ache in my fingertips, like something pulling on my nerves. I stood for a solid minute and just tried to catch my breath. All this was from a single sunflower. I had hundreds of plants. But why hadn't they reacted when I replanted some of them the night before? Plants can't consider intent. And there, on the floor, lay the now dead sunflower. It had instantly shriveled up into this grey, dried up mess. And the smell still lingered. My hands were shaking. It was as if my body felt like I'd done something far more horrible than just uproot a plant. I felt like I'd murdered something. I couldn't bring myself to clear it all out. Not only was it a lot of work, but I was throwing out a lot of money. People loved these things, and they were pretty to look at. And as long as people are happy, what's the harm? That, and the thought of that smell, just, ugh. So instead of clearing it out, I opened the greenhouses to the public. I put out a sign, doubled the price, and kept the place open for an extra 2 hours. I figured I could clear the place out while still making some extra money. Again, an amazing sale. All day long, people were eager to come claim their new flowery friend. Everyone seemed eager to get one. Even John Gaines, the burly man from the gas station. He never smiled as much as smiled, but he was just as eager as the rest of them. I just let it happen. As my supplier came by with more inventory, I put it all up in the greenhouses. The next day, I was actually relieved to see they'd all turned blue. Blue was where the money was. That's what people wanted. You could see them in every window, in every shop, in every garden. The blue flowers were everywhere, and they were oh so loved. I even changed the sign. The shop was turning into the blue garden, not the green garden. It made sense in a way. This was the passing of the torch I'd waited for, the big blue. Sort of poetic, considering I wanted to be a marine biologist. Then came the confrontation with Mrs. Morris. You know, the one I started the story with, where she, unable to get some of our blue flowers, just threw a fit. To me, this was a turning point. Sure, Mrs. Morris was a known grump, but this was beyond her. Vandalising the store and calling me names? No, that was not normal. And yes, eventually my purple azaleas would turn blue, but that was no excuse for my customers to act like animals. For the rest of the day, I tiptoed around my customers, ready for another outburst. I did find a few more blues in the back rooms that I could sell off, but about half of all customers didn't get one that day. Some just left immediately, others expressed disappointment. 2 other people, like Mrs. Morris, were verbally abusive. That night, as I was closing up, I slumped down in a chair next to the front door. I was exhausted, and somehow, despite thinking we were out of blue flowers all day, some were still around. It was as if they popped up out of nowhere when I wasn't looking. I don't understand, I whispered into the empty room. Where are you coming from? As I sunk my face into my hands, I could hear something. Looking up, I could see a few remaining flowers rattle their petals, almost as if responding. A second later, they stopped, in unison. I thought about saying something else, asking if they could hear me, asking if they'd hurt my mother. But honestly, I didn't dare to ask. What if they answered? What would they say? I started getting paranoid. On early mornings, I could find myself standing outside the shop doors, listening. I had this idea that the flowers had started speaking whenever I wasn't around, like a delusional nightmare variant of Toy Story. Of course, they didn't. They were flowers. And yet, I wasn't buying this soil imbalance theory either. Flowers don't turn blue from that, and they certainly don't make people violent. On my way to work, I started seeing them. In windows, in gardens, and storefronts. Sure, I'd had many customers, but some of these flowers weren't even the types we were selling. The strangest thing I saw was a blue Venus flytrap. While many blue flowers had turned a bit smaller than their original, the Venus flytrap was the size of a fist. It had been put in a pot outside a gas station, and I could see the whole thing just swelling with flies. They were climbing over one another, swarming, just to get a chance to push themselves inside the flytrap. I'd never seen anything like it, and I knew for a fact that thing didn't come from my store. When I got to my store that morning, it was filled to the brim with pristine blue flowers. Some from pots I hadn't even used, some from pots that didn't even have soil. The store looked brand new, like I'd gotten a mystery shipment overnight. I knew that I could step inside and just drink in the sweet aroma. I longed to feel it in a way. But every rational part of me knew this wasn't normal, and something inside of me was screaming to get away, to run, to get the hell out of town. So instead, I closed down the blue gardens. I taped up a large garbage bags over the windows and added a handmade, closed until further notice sign on the front door. As I was doing this, I could hear protesting voices across the street. Mrs. Morris was no doubt one of them. Instead of confronting them, I just hurried up and left. Hey, I could hear as I crossed the street. What do you think you're doing? I just kept walking. I could hear something being thrown. Keep walking. I had 6 missed calls before I even got home. All unique numbers. As the day went on, I even heard someone bang on my front door. There was yelling, but I couldn't understand what they were saying. Someone was driving in circles around the parking lot, honking, while my phone kept ringing. I hid in the shower. I couldn't hear anything through the rushing water. No phones ringing, no cars honking, nothing. It was just me and my own thoughts, for a little while. I couldn't just keep the store closed forever, but I couldn't live with the strangeness of the blue flowers. And for a moment, I got this sensation washing over me. I could picture my mom, standing in the same shower, faced with the same problem. What was her solution? And was it that solution that made her sick? I didn't eat all day. I curled up in a blanket on my sofa, listening to my phone ring away. Every tone felt like a hammer blows on an anvil, trying to shape me into something worrisome. When I finally broke down and reached to turn it off, I couldn't help but see a few messages I'd received. Open right now. Open the doors. Please open. Why are you closed? And finally, as the sender seemed to grow more impatient, it just said, we're going in. But this was sent over 20 minutes ago, and no one had been banging on my door for a while. So I figured they were going to the store. They were breaking in. No matter my feelings for those plants or the people who wanted them, I couldn't let them destroy my mother's shop. It was the green gardens, my green gardens. Except in a way, it wasn't. I couldn't bring myself to imagine that little store broken into and plundered. I knew every inch of that space, and thinking about it being ruined just broke my heart. I got in my car, called the police, and frantically explained the threats I'd been receiving. When I finally got there, just after 4 p.m, it was already too late. Every window had been broken. Pots and soil and flowers either knocked over, broken, or stolen. The sign had been vandalized. Now it just says The Blue. Gardens were shattered into pieces and strewn along the sidewalk. I just stood there, until a tap on my shoulder snapped me out of it. I saw a family of crows snacking on sunflower seeds among the shards of glass. It was a police officer, a man in his early 50s. I'd seen him around, but never really talked to him. He had a kind face. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sure the insurance covers it. You need a minute?" "Yeah," I nodded. "Yeah, I do." He stood with me quietly for a while and just looked at the mess. "You're the daughter, right? Her kid?" he asked. I nodded. A lot of people knew my mother. She'd broken a lot of hearts. "She had her accidents too, you know. The whole greenhouse burned down once." "It did?" I asked. "You didn't know?" he chuckled. Yeah, the middle one. It just burned to the ground overnight. She never even claimed damages for it. She just let it happen." That's what she did. That was her solution. As he left to fill out a report, that got me thinking. Maybe Mum had the same problem, and maybe she solved it the best way she knew how, to just cleanse it all in fire. But maybe that was what got her sick in the first place. I remember how sick I'd felt after pulling up one of the blue flowers by the root, the stir in my stomach. There was something there, and that was just from a single flower. I filled out the insurance report. I talked to the officers down at the station. I took the pictures, and we put up the tape. And all the while, I made my own plans. I was going to burn it all to the ground. Greenhouses, the store, everything. I loved that place, but I couldn't imagine it being turned into this breeding ground for something my mother hated. That night, I returned with a can of gas. But as I got there, I was surprised to see the broken store swarmed with people. At least a dozen of them scrounging around, looking for seedlings. Some of them were just shoveling dirt into their mouths. One woman was just sitting on the counter, eating sunflower seeds from a bag with her bare hands. I stepped in through the broken window and called out to them. "Get out now!" I yelled. "I'm not warning you a second time." No reaction. Fine. The second I started pouring out gasoline, they all turned on me. Even a few of the blue flowers that had sprouted up seemed to rattle in my direction, their dry leaves shivering. But the intruders? Their eyes were dark, and dirt dripped from their mouths. They looked like a parody of themselves, bad copies that didn't quite function as intended. As John Gaines from the gas station came lumbering towards me with a garden hoe, I instinctively picked up the closest thing to throw at him, a tiny blue sunflower in a pot. I anticipated an attack, but instead, he just stopped and looked at me. It was as if he was so afraid to hurt the plant that he just couldn't keep going. The plant was my camouflage, my shield. I clutched it tight and poured out the entire can. It's hard to describe just how much gasoline stinks when it's all out in the open. It can make you choke and gag if you're not ready for it. I just stepped back, lit my lighter, and called out for a final time. "Out! Now!" Then, flames. There were so many screams, some human, some not. Some from the people in the store, but others echoed throughout the street. Every house, every garden, every little space with one of the blue flowers, they were all screaming. People came running out of the broken store, crying, clutching bags of soil against their chest, choking on the dirt and seeds in their mouth. One man just stumbled out on the pavement, shaking like the rattling petals on the burning flowers. And there I stood, still clutching a little blue sunflower. My shield. It was all I could do to shield myself from the effect of these plants. I had to keep one alive, to be a custodian. I had to trick them. All around me, the world burned. As I heard sirens approaching, I saw the flames reflect in the tears of the desperate bystanders. It was over. This was a few years ago. I think what I did differently from my mother was to keep a flower for myself. Sort of like a vaccine, keeping me a tiny bit infected in order to not get too sick all at once. I left that plant behind in an old apartment years ago. I even coloured the pot. The sad sunflower, I called it, because it's blue, you know? It has to be a bit sad about being by itself, and I figured a single flower wouldn't hurt anyone. I had to move out of town. Selling the house got me enough money to go to college, and I've since started on a journey to finally get my degree as a marine biologist. Whatever gets me away from the blue gardens and into the real big blue. And yeah, it is sad to think that my mom's favourite place in the world is gone. It feels a bit like losing her all over again, but on the other hand, I don't think she would have liked to see what happened to it. After all, she tried to do the same thing. I hope the sad sunflower was just left alone. I hope that chapter of my life is gone. And I hope my mom can rest easy knowing that the blue gardens will never harm anyone ever again. So I have a dream about my professor. He's wearing all black. We're in class, but this is a completely different class from the lecture hall. All the desks are bunched together on one side of the room, away from the left wall. So I talked to my friend, and she was excited about a video we're going to watch. And we watched the video. It's horrendous. Everyone is standing so still, and I'm like, what the heck is going on? And then he passes out permission slips to hypnotize us. Before I have time to react, this blonde lady comes from behind me and snaps her fingers at me. I'm on the left wall, and so is everyone else. Everyone is dead asleep. I'm somewhat awake, but I'm a bit out of it. I try grabbing for my professor as he walks around, but I can't. The lady goes down the row of people sitting on the wall, and she puts a locust in people's mouths. She came to me. I was the only one or so, I think, to refuse it. Dream ends. Fast forward a couple of days later. I go to class like usual. I hear voices telling me to straight up leave that classroom, but of course, thinking I was crazy, I just stay. So he shows us a couple videos. And in the last video, it was literally a bunch of strobing lights. And there were words or phrases said every so often. I tried to cover my eyes. After class, everyone was acting weird as if they were hypnotized. I was in a daze. I asked about an assignment and left. Later on, I looked up if that's how you hypnotize a mass amount of people, and that is how you can do it. Using strobing light to induce a hypnotic trance. I was having a major anxiety attack, and I said to myself I need to get out of Dodge like ASAP. So I leave and start heading to my car. A crow comes and sits on a pole and caws at me. I was thinking to myself, maybe I should go back and tell him that those strobing lights could have given someone a seizure. I see him over by his car watching me. I tell him and he apologizes. I go home. Feels like someone or something is with me in the car. Fast forward a few days later, after all my crazy awakening things, I feel this heavy presence surrounding me. And I confirmed it through a psychic who was watching my energy at the time that something was there. I don't know what it was for sure, but it was mad at me and I felt like it was talking through a psychic channel. I convinced it to go away. It comes back and wants to be gone. Like, gone. I had to sage the entire house. A few years ago in 2019, a friend of mine was going through some paranormal oppression by something he had brought onto himself. He did so by making a shrine in his closet and praying to whatever it was. He described this spirit as a man with no face and a top hat. My friend performed self-harm on himself because he said it told him to. When he did this, it was years ago and he'd been dealing with it up until he asked me and another friend for help. We went to a friend's apartment before we went to his parents' house, where we had conjured this being. He alerted my other friend that the demonic presence was there looking at him. At that specific time, we were around 8 or 10 other people. Nobody saw it, not even me, but I felt that heavy feeling on my shoulders. We went to his house to try and find the root. The friend having the issues took us up to his room, and as I walked in, I saw a hand-painted picture of the likeness of Jesus Christ. It was in fact not Jesus Christ, I could just feel it. So the oppressed friend is walking around freaking out, and the friend helping me pulls out her Bible. Before she begins to pray, I walk close to the open closet, and I don't remember moving back at all, but I ended up against the dresser a good 7 to 8 feet away from the closet, so pretty much on the other side of the room. I felt this overwhelming fight or flight, and since you can't physically fight demons, I left the room. They both came down after. The oppressed friend was fine, and the friend that took over after I left had physical tears coming out of her eyes. A few months later, we reconnect with said friend, and he says he's accepted that this thing will be in his life and is done trying to wish it away, as he put it. I don't know what that thing was. I never saw a physical manifestation, but it bothers me. It still puts the fear of God in me, for lack of a better phrase. I thought it was about time I started sharing the odd things that happened to me. This event goes back a few years to an apartment we lived in. It was a house split into two apartments. We lived on the bottom floor. I should note that it was normal for my husband to go upstairs and hang out with them for a while, leaving me alone. Plus, the part of the building it took place in wouldn't have anyone walking around outside. While in the bathroom, I heard someone walk into the kitchen and start to whistle a tune. I could hear them opening cupboards and, of course, assumed my husband had come back. The whistling stopped for a few seconds, and then they started the tune from the beginning. They stopped again, cutting the tune short, and started again after a few seconds. At this point, I noticed that it sounded the same, and I mean exactly the same. This happened a couple more times, each time the tune getting shorter until it was nothing them reaping the same first note, over and over again. In fast succession, while getting close to the bathroom. I looked at the door handle and tried to brace it so nothing could open it. The whistler got faster and faster, then held the last note at an unhuman pitch that distorted. The note was held for so long that I thought I'd be trapped in the bathroom until someone came down. Then, silence. I don't know how long I paced around the bathroom before I got up the nerve to open the door, but it felt like a while. Whenever I'm by myself and hear whistling, it makes me freeze in place, hoping it will not come back. This one thing that has to be the worst by far. It's hard to describe the sense of dread and fear that this thing gives off. It honestly felt like my life was at risk and my whole body would scream to run. Anytime I would hear this thing, I was alone, which of course just made it all worse. One night, the dog was outside barking, so I got up and went out to look. As I was looking outside, the dog went back in and left me alone standing in the dark next to the shed. I soon became aware of noises in the shed, but put it down to wind. That is, until it moved closer, and I felt a strong sense of dread. I listened to the sound. It sounds like a person on all fours scuffling around. I heard it move towards the shed door, so I ran inside and slammed the door. I sat down and tried to tell myself it was just the wind. At first the dread was going away, but then I could feel it building up again. It felt like it was trying to find a way in, moving back and forth along the walls of the house. Then I suddenly felt it inside the apartment. It had got into the kitchen. I could feel it getting slowly closer. I was too scared to look behind me into the kitchen, but I managed to jump up and slammed the door. I hoped it would leave, and it did. After this, I would hear it sometimes, just scuffling around at night. The alley at the back was dark and smelly, so I assumed it liked it. Now this next bit is truly a fault on my own part. I really should have listened to my own gut feeling. Months later, it's summer, and therefore very warm, so I had the back door open. I was on my laptop, and it had gotten dark. At some point, I turned the light on and sat back down. I sat facing the back door. My laptop screen stopped me from seeing the bottom half of the door. After a while, I started hearing movement outside and felt uneasy. I told myself it was nothing. The feeling grew stronger and stronger. My whole body screamed at me to run. Then, our dog comes running downstairs, stops in the middle of the room, looks at me, and then goes to walk outside. The way she did this was just odd. I pulled down my screen and watched her head towards the back door. As she walked out the back door, there was this thing. Some humanoid figure crouched down by the door. Its skin is dark brown, like dirt and rot with the texture of a burn victim. Hairless and skinny, like it hadn't eaten in months. There it was, this thing I had been in fear of for so long, right up against the door frame, trying to make its way inside. The figure twisted its emaciated form round to follow our dog. It was crouched down onto its hands and feet. That's why it made a scuffling noise. I jumped up and threw my laptop on the floor. I ran upstairs and refused to go back down alone. The stupidest thing was that I doubted myself, and if it wasn't for the dog, then I don't know what would have happened. Her look towards when she came downstairs, I can only imagine she was wondering why I wasn't running away. My friend told me it sounds like a skinwalker and that Europe does have accounts of such things. I don't know what it was, and I'm so happy we moved. This is a current issue I'm having. As a bit of a backstory, my life isn't short of paranormal experiences, and even now, I'm sharing my house with spirits that have been here much longer than I have. I also live near a very big graveyard. Around the start of the year, I started feeling like I was being followed down the stairs. It never follows me fully downstairs, sometimes leaning over, almost touching me, sometimes crawling. It will not go near the last 5 steps. Sometimes I brush my teeth and it's leaning over to watch me in the mirror. At first, I didn't think much of it, but last weekend, my husband went to see his family for a few days, leaving me alone in the house with our 2 dogs. That first night was fine, and I had no issues, but the next day, I started feeling it again, just following me about. I tried to ignore it as much as possible. Normally, it would go away after a while, but not that day. I felt it stronger as time went by, most likely as it realised my husband wasn't home yet. By night time, I was getting flash images in my mind of long, unkept black hair. Its back hunched over. Its pale face was not known to me. I had caught sight of its face in the mirror in the past. Once again, it would normally not come into the bedroom, but that night was not a normal night. I was alone. At this point, I'm already in bed. I feel it step in and slowly make its way over to where I lay. It creeps in close to me, leans down and turns its face to match up with mine. It then just stares. That's all it ever does, stare. I have had others do this before, but they always kept their distance. But this one, it likes to be almost pressing up against me. I feel it's static. In the end, I had to turn around and face the other way to get any sleep. The next night was exactly the same. On the day of my husband's return, everything was fine. When it got to night, it started up again, and by the time I had to get ready for bed, I was being followed again. My husband comes down the stairs, also getting ready for bed. At this point, I'm talking freely about how the creeper's hiding in the airing cupboard, thinking this will stop it from being seen by my husband. I make my way to bed, and it's keeping its distance. It doesn't follow me into the room, but instead goes into the spare room and just waits. The only thing it did that night was get as close to the wall as it could. Fast forward a few days to current times. It's the 1st of May and the creeper's back. It just followed me on my trip to the bathroom and decided to touch my hair. I'm back downstairs now, and I can feel it just sitting and waiting on the stairs. I've tried telling it it's taking the piss. I've even told it to stop, but it just keeps at it. It doesn't react to the fact that I've pointed out that I know it's there. I'm not sure what to do. And it doesn't seem to want anything other than to stalk me. I'm getting stalked in my own home by a spirit. The creep will not leave me alone. This is the second scariest thing I've had to deal with of paranormal nature. I've lived in this house for almost 2 years now, and this is the only place where it's happened. The first encounter happened in the first year, and the last 3 have been in the past 4 months or so. Another thing to note is that I can wake myself up from bad dreams. My brain kicks in and tells me it's okay, it's just a dream, just wake up. It takes on the form of whatever it wants, but its face is always the same. I know how this is going to sound. I'll try my best to describe it. The first things to spring to your mind will be Jeff or Momo. but these do not look anything like it. These things are very human-like, as if its face is just a tiny bit past the realm of what a human could manage. Its eyes, they're always effortlessly wide open. So wide, I make out the roundness of its eyeballs. So focused and so intense, like the shocked eyes of someone who realizes they're going to die and there's nothing they can do about it but see their last moments. Its mouth is a closed smile. This too is effortless. The mouth never moves and is always shut. I swear, this is its preferred expression. And yet, with all this, its face is somehow blank, and this thing never makes a single sound. First encounter, I was dreaming of cleaning the house when I went to put on some towels in the airing cupboard and realized something felt off. I looked to where the feeling was coming from, and there, standing by the boiler, was my partner. At first I was confused. To get to it, one would have to take a bunch of shelves. There wouldn't be much room to stand normally, even with the shelves out, but they were still in. I started to feel more and more unsettled as I looked at them. I then realized it was the facial expression. Everything but that face looked like my partner. Of course, my brain kicks in and tells me to just wake up and it will be gone. So that's what I do. But once awake, I can't shake off the feelings of that face. I'm still scared of what I'll find when I open the airing cupboard door. Second encounter. After an epic dream about a boat trip after a war, I went into a shop and looked around. I stood there staring at sometimes hanging on hooks when I had that off feeling again. Out of the corner of my eye, I see someone walk next to me and stare at the items too. I looked around and they turned to face me. They turned their whole body as if they were standing still on a turning table. Looking back at me was that face again, but in someone else's body. Someone I had a dream about the night before. I quickly turned away, and once again my brain kicked in with a big nope, and I woke up. Third encounter. I have sleeping issues, and on this one night I couldn't get to sleep. My surroundings started to feel weird, and I knew something was about to enter the room. I turned around and pulled the cover up to eye height. The second it came into the room, it hit me. That same exact feeling it gives off. But this time, it's not in my dream. It's standing right up to my side of the bed. It didn't walk it. No, it just appeared. For the first time, it moved. From the hips and lower back, it bent over me. This thing was bent over me at a 90-degree angle. Its face hovered inches from my own. I grabbed hold of my partner and slowly pulled myself close to them. I clenched my eyes shut and tried to think of anything else other than what was happening. Flashes of its facial features would appear to me. Then it stopped. It vanished. I realized my grip on the partner had spent a good hour just staring at the ceiling. Fourth encounter. And now we get to last night. I was dreaming of sitting on a bed, playing with a phone that belonged to the sister in my dream. The battery got low, and I started to install the game on my phone. The sister walks in and starts shouting at me, telling me she forbids me to install it and that I can only play it on her phone. I tell her where to shove it, and she walks out claiming to be going to turn the internet off to stop me. She walks off, and I moan about her. Then the feeling again. I turn to the doorway that the sister walked through, and there, high up, it was there, looking at me. The only thing that could be seen was the head up to the start of the nose. This time, it's stolen the sister's look. There on the top of her head, clear as day, was the sister's brown hair. The sister was not this tall. Its eyes looked at me. I could feel its smile and it stared at me. Instead of trying to wake me up, my brain and body went straight into trying to physically scream. My partner woke me up after my first two muffled screams. This thing seems hell-bent on torturing me, and I don't have plans of moving anytime soon. I just hope someone may know what this is.